Welcome to Bovine Banter with the Penn State Extension Dairy Team. I'm Ginger Fenton, an educator on the team. Throughout this series of the Bovine Banter podcast, we are focusing on various renewable energy sources and considerations for dairy farms. In this episode, we'll learn more from an educator with many years of experience in the energy industry who also understands the dairy industry. Dan Brockett is the Assistant State Program Leader and part of the Agronomy and Natural Resources team, who focuses on energy and also is part of the Butcher School. Thank you for being here today, Dan.
Thanks, Ginger. Weird combination, right? But that's what keeps the job interesting.
It
So
is.
thanks for having me. It's very flattering. I expect to be podcast famous at the end of this. So thank you for my rise to fame,
Sure
right?
thing. We'll do our best. Could you please introduce yourself a little more, Dan, and tell us about your role with Penn State Extension?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been here a long time. Makes me sound old, but I actually started when I was 4. I was a prodigy. Now that's a complete lie, but uh, I've had a variety of positions within extension, starting with 4-H and then community and economic development. And now more recently, I've focused on energy as it's become a huge topic. And really, I'm most interested in the nexus between energy and agriculture because these things tend to share a similar footprint. And how can we make that work? Can we make that work? Right?
That ties into my first question for you, and I appreciate it. You were one of the key drivers in suggesting this series on how agriculture and energy can work together. Based on your interactions with farmers and with the energy industry, what prompted your suggestion for this series?
Well, what mostly prompted it is the latest energy evolution in Pennsylvania has really gone from natural gas production, which is what I focused on for years with Marcellus Utica, into large scale solar or larger scale solar. And I saw this interesting development, Ginger, where I would see multi-generational families who farmed and lived next to each other who were at odds over this issue. Okay. And it really is an issue for agriculture because large scale solar takes a lot of space. Okay. It eats up a lot of space. One of the things about ag land is it's the best land for everything. So ag land, you think about it, well-drained soils, sunny, we're not fighting as many rocks and roots, steep slopes, all those kind of things. Those best fields that we have, they're the best fields for everything. So if I'm going to build residential housing, I'm looking at that beautiful field out there and saying that's where I'm going to build it. If I'm going to build a shopping mall, warehouses, a highway, a school district, a campus, anything else, and solar, that's a prime target area, right? So what we're seeing right now is it's going to take about 5 to 7 acres per megawatt to build solar development. At the same time, people are rightfully saying, hey, look, that's prime agricultural land. Do we want to use that to develop energy? So looking at that and saying, we have an issue here. Is there any way we can make this work for both ends? Really, it comes down to a land use decision and land restriction decision. And we've seen all kinds of interesting conversation about that. But where it's turned a little ugly at times is when we have families, property owners who are neighbors, sometimes, as I mentioned, multi-generational neighbors who are in conflict over this. So I thought, we need to have a serious conversation about agriculture, food production, and energy. And Ginger, here's what they have in common. We tend to take for granted that our food supply and our energy supply is going to be cheap, affordable, reliable, quality, always there on demand, right? When you flick on your lights, you don't think, I wonder where that was generated and how it got here, right? We just do it, right? When we go to the grocery store, we just say, hey, I came to pick up a can of beans or a steak or, some lettuce, whatever. We don't think about where did that come from? How did it get here, right? And in fact, in both cases, consumers, we tend to, if we go to the grocery store and they're out of something, we're like, what's wrong with this place? Why are we out of it? The tremendous production and logistics to get that product from nothing to sitting on your grocery store is the same kind of process to get energy from where it's generated to your home, business, barn, whatever, right? And we take them both for granted. Looking at that, I wanted to have the opportunity for our team to be able to explore that issue and say, what can we make work, not with zero pain, okay? Because every energy source has a problem, all of them. But can we mitigate this to work for both sides?
So we know land is a very valuable and limited commodity. What options have you observed that farmers have been presented for alternative uses for land? And then how have you seen this change over time?
Yeah, again, this comes down to land use, economics, et cetera, et cetera. So if I have a farm and someone comes along and offers me 2 or 3 times the fair market value per acre, now I have a decision to make. And that decision is not necessarily based on the economics and sensibilities of everybody in Pennsylvania. It's based on me and my family, right? So, if someone comes along, I love my home right now, but if someone comes along and offers me 3 times fair market value today, I think I'm going to have to consider that, right? What's best for my family? What's best for the long-term economic situation that we have, right? So those are strong considerations. We've seen this play out, okay? And here's how we're losing farmland right now. Between 2017 and 2022, we lost 220,000 acres of farmland. Some of that farmland is some of the best farmland, non-irrigated soils in all of North America. Now, we didn't lose probably any more than 200 acres of that through solar development. We lost most of that through housing, okay, and then through commercial development. Think Walmart, warehouses, all those kind of things that occur on those farms. And those offers were probably far and above what those landowners were going to get in terms of ag production, right? So all of that acreage that we lost, and I would expect we'll continue to lose, it's somewhat irreversible. In other words, we're probably not going to peel up a parking lot and try to plant corn on it in the future. We're probably not going to eliminate houses on 1 acre, 2 acre lots and turn it back into a soybean field, right? So we really need to think through that issue of how are we going to protect and preserve that valuable farmland. With solar development, again, 5 to 7 acres per megawatt, and we need a lot of energy in this country, in this state, and that energy need will continue to grow at an exceptionally rapid rate, which I'll get into hopefully in a little bit. We need to make some hard decisions and maybe take a look at big picture to say, how are we going to make this happen, right? And can we make this happen without causing kind of irreversible decisions that we'll come to regret maybe 20 or 30 years from now? Does that make sense?
It does. As a farmer is assessing their options, where do you recommend they start to look for resources and look for guidance for what they should do?
Yeah, I hope they'll tap into our energy team resources. Okay. There's a lot of different flavors of energy and of solar energy, especially. Okay. So the 3 places that we focus on for solar energy, one is utility scale. And that means that energy is being produced on the ground, but it's all going to the grid. The grid is a very important factor for keeping energy on demand all the time, everywhere we're at. Okay. but it's going up on those big transmission lines. So not distribution lines, big transmission lines. In this case, the farmer is a passive landlord. That energy project is going to be built. It's going to have a fence around it by law, chain link fence, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to produce electrons, and those electrons will be transported over transmission lines to wherever they're going to go. So that large scale solar, we're usually talking about at least 10 megawatts of panels here, and we're looking usually at 20 or more megawatts. Again, if you do the math on that, even at the low end of 5 acres per megawatt, we might see hundreds and thousands of acres of panels. Now, what might surprise folks is in this area of the country, because our land, we don't have those 1,000-acre fields, right? Like we'll see in the Midwest, right? We'll see smaller blocks that are all tied into one. So the projects I've seen that are 1,000 acres, they're really, maybe 50 acres here and 20 acres here and 140 acres over here that are all tied into the same network and the same meter that are going to the grid. Now, the second type of solar that we're seeing, this is a hard one to describe. We're calling it merchant generator solar. Some people say customer generated. Some people even will say that this is community solar. Now, I'll tell you that community solar is not allowed by law yet in Pennsylvania. But all of these three things behave somewhat similarly in that they're smaller, and we're talking anywhere between, say, 10 acres and maybe 60 acres of panels at that point. They have to be 3 megawatt or less to fit under the exception that is merchant generator, customer generator. And they tend to only occupy one property owner at a time, so they're not spread over a lot. Now, I would say the greatest advantage for those of us who practice agriculture is it's a smaller array. We're not going to chew up the entirety of the farm, okay? We can tend to put that in places that are less productive on our land. Okay, so this is the one of the arguments that's worth having is if we're going to restrict development on some of our best soils, how are we going to define that? How are we going to make that stick? So I've seen a lot of folks who have proposed, hey, no development shall occur on, say, class 1 and class 2 soils, or some folks are going clear down to class 4 soils, et cetera, et cetera. I would contend that most farmers, they know, I don't care how big or small your farm is, they know what's their best soil and their best and not their best. One of the farms that I looked at, I was surprised to see a large dairy farm, tremendous need for forage close by, and they were willing to lease a portion of their property because of deer damage. Okay. They're suffering a tremendous loss of production because of deer damage, and said, hey, we're going to be better further ahead, leasing this portion of the property, getting it behind fence, and getting a regular steady check as a passive landlord for this array, and trying to grow our forage somewhere else. Okay. So I would say these merchant generator / customer generator things may have a great advantage for those folks who are still want to actively farm, still have a plan to farm down the road, but want to keep it out of their best fields. There's a lot of subtlety in there, Ginger. You can imagine when it comes to legal contracts, how are you ensuring it's where you want to be and not where you don't want it? Our best advice to landowners is, first of all, you really can't dictate this is exactly where the project is going to be. Those developers need to have access to the sun, and they need to have access to some sort of distribution. So when you look at a map of your property, if you just mark off areas where you don't want it to be, that may be the best strategy. And I will say this probably, hopefully 6 or 7 times. It's a legal contract. Get a good attorney. preferably one who has experience in solar leasing, to make sure that you get what you want and that you don't get what you don't want, right? That's very, very important. So I've seen examples here recently where a farm friend of mine leased some property. It's reclaimed strip mine land. It's not highly productive for him. He's been using it for some hay production at best. He doesn't plant corn, soybeans, high value crops there. And he can easily give that up for the check he's going to receive back for solar. That lease has been signed, but the development hasn't occurred yet. We'll see how, we'll see how it works out for him. But the opportunity is there for him to make some income, and that'll offset those up and down years in the corn soybean market, which is primarily what he does, and hopefully smooth over those rough edges. It's nice for farmers to get a steady paycheck. That doesn't happen very often.
You touched on locations, definitely something that a farmer needs to consider. Are there other questions that a farmer should have in mind or things that they should ask early on in the conversation with the energy company?
Yeah, first of all, for those who haven't had a lot of experience of dealing with land agents, my first piece of advice is the conversations are not a terrible thing to have, but they're better if they're in writing. So I know there are some folks who have had very successful transactions strictly through email. Even through text is better than a conversation, right? Whatever the land agent told you over the phone or sitting at the coffee table, it may not be reliable information. They may have said things that won't be in the contract, or you may have interpreted them differently, right? The land agent has a job, and that is they've been given a territory and they are supposed to lock up contracts in that territory. In general, they're going to say things that are going to convince you to sign that piece of paper. When you get those things in writing, even in an email form, not a formal contract, I think they'll be a little more careful and cautious about what they write. And that's information that you can share with your family, your legal counsel, and anyone else you might reach out with. It's just a simpler transaction. So, the big bottom line is verbal generally doesn't count, written generally does. So let's get everything in writing, even outside of that formal contract. Get that email, right? That's a lot better.
Great advice. Thank you. Based on your observations, what do you think the biggest misconceptions or maybe I'll say unknowns are about using your land for energy production?
Yeah, so there's a lot of people who are rightfully concerned about what happens at the end of the life of this, and that's true whether you have an oil and gas well or whether you have solar panels or windmills or anything else. Those are good and legitimate concerns for a landowner to have. I will tell you, Ginger, I have some farmers who are maybe a little older, and they'll go, "Well, I don't care. I won't be around to see it anyway." And I always ask them, "Well, do you like your children, but do you also like your grandchildren?" That's going to be a decision, and a hard decision, and maybe some problems, maybe 20, 30, 40 years out. We're seeing that right now in Northwest Pennsylvania, at least, other parts of Pennsylvania as well. We have some orphaned and abandoned oil and gas wells that are maybe a problem. And that shouldn't be the landowner's problem. Okay. As long as the landowner doesn't own or operate that well, it shouldn't be a problem. But we still have to work around those things, don't we? So those fields I see that have that gas well, have that storage tank right in the middle of it, at the very least, you've got to manipulate your equipment in and around those. It's a pain in the neck. It just causes a disruption in what you do. Then, if we have any sort of leaks and so forth, that creates a further problem. You don't need or want that to be your issue, but there it is, and you've got to do something about it. Now, with solar panels, I know there are some folks who have some very strong reaction to it. There's concern over oh, maybe there's toxic metals in there. Maybe there's something that's going to happen to the ground underneath. Recent research that we've seen from our Penn State soil labs says we don't see toxic metals sloughing off into the soils and so forth. But that still leaves us with this big issue. So I would say if you have a solar panel or if you have a microwave, that microwave probably has more issues than the solar panel. The difference is we don't throw away 40,000 microwaves at a time, but we might have end of life and need to dispose of 40,000 panels. So we don't want that to be the landowner's responsibility. Can you imagine taking your pickup truck out there and trying to haul these things to the dump, 4 or 5 at a time? You would spend a lifetime doing that. So we want to make sure that there is, some sort of plan with some surety attached to it, right? That they will be disposed of. Now, I'll tell you that every lease I've read says, hey, we will restore that property to its current or better condition, right? So that's good. Good language to start with. But then there has to be something there that is going to provide teeth to that promise, okay? So if I promise to pay you next Wednesday for a hamburger I eat today, right, it's more applicable if there's some penalty if I don't. So what we're looking for is some good, strong language in there that would have maybe a performance bond that renews every 5 years or anytime that array changes possession. In other words, if Dan's solar company becomes Ginger's solar company, we want Ginger to renew that bond. The reason is there's never been a 20, 30-year bond written that has enough money in it at the end of 30 years to actually pay for it. So if we renew it every 5 years, okay, then we can really structure that to not only be fair, okay, because at the beginning of life, we should still have a lot of value in that solar equipment and that solar array. Towards the end of life is when we tend to have a lower value than the value of the array or the scrap value. Okay, so we can really put that in a better position for both the landowner and the developer or the owner of that solar at that time. So those are important considerations. The other important consideration, of course, is the use of your own property. And there's 100 things that could fit below this, but I'll highlight a couple. One is I'm an advocate of if someone is going to use your property in some way that doesn't allow you to use it in its best and fullest use, then you should be compensated. So for the most part, a lease is going to say, we're going to pay you X amount per acre per year for everything that's behind this chain link fence. But we also have access roads. We have right of ways for that electricity to leave, those electrons to leave the site and get on a distribution or transmission line. And we also have things that I can't build a building next to it that's going to cause shade. I can't plant a tree, et cetera, et cetera. So those areas, those transition areas, we want to make sure that that's well spelled out where you can and can't be. And I would prefer that there be some level of compensation for that. And landowners should consider that. If I can't build a house there, a shed, plant a tree, et cetera, even if I don't plan to right now, something prevents me from doing that 20 years from now. We want to make sure we get our compensation. We all know that those right-of-way lines, now I have a permanent restriction across my property. I want to be compensated for that. And I want to make sure the location of that doesn't impede what I might want to do in the future. That's tough stuff to imagine out 20, 30 years from now, what might me or someone else want to do on that property. This is such a long-term decision. We got to plan now so that we don't have bad consequences in 2 decades, right? So really in terms of location, another consideration is let's say I lease 20 acres to someone. Did I strand some acreage in the back that I can't even access anymore? I can't use it, I can't access it, et cetera, et cetera. I got a plan to make sure that doesn't happen. I did it to myself, but now I just made that property unusable. Let's not do that to ourselves. So let's make sure it fits, right? So it's really a land consideration, all those kind of things. The financial consideration, which is really the only reason why any of us would consider this. Here's the prices, right? Which I'm sure your listeners would be excited to hear. So we were looking at the beginning of this. I was seeing a lot of $1,000, $1,200 per acre per year leases. The shortest lease I've ever seen is 25 years. Okay. That's a long time, right? Useful life of a panel, coincidentally, is estimated at 25 years. They will diminish over time, but that's not our concern because unlike oil and gas, our landowners aren't getting a royalty payment. They're just getting a lease payment. It's like having a rental out there, okay? A rental that we generally don't touch, don't do anything with. We're just going to get that passive income, meaning we don't have to do anything except tolerate that that spot is being unused. Now, for these newer merchant generators slash customer generator, community solar, maybe someday things, the price has gone up considerably. So now we're seeing lease rates at $1,500 to up to $3,500 per acre per year. All of these, all of them that I have seen so far, have a rent escalator. That rent escalator has been generally between 1% on the low side up to 2.5%. Now, I will tell you that when I first saw these leases, that would have been fall of 2017. It's the first time I ever saw one. We were seeing most of these at fairly low rates, 1%, 1.5%, 2% was a pleasant surprise, right? We also had really low inflation rates at that time. Those of us who are older remember this, but those who are young maybe are accustomed to seeing really low inflation rates. I don't know about you, Ginger, but the first house I bought, 7.5% interest. We thought that was a great rate. Okay. Now today we go, wow, why are we paying so much? Right. So inflation generally has been more than 2%. So now we're seeing a lot of landowners push back on that and saying, hey, let's do better. I would say the standard rate for the industry right now comes in around 2%, but landowners are and should be pushing for a little better. Some, I believe, are even pushing to go with an index so that when inflation goes up, so does their rate, their escalator. But I think because most of these projects are either have an investor or someone who's going to purchase this project at the end, they want to be able to show on a spreadsheet what this investment is going to do over 25 years. Everything, they all want a cap on how high could this go, okay, for the most part. Now, everything is negotiable, but it seems to be that those rent escalators do have a pretty firm cap at this time. Who knows? Maybe that'll change down the road, but they want some certainty in how much could this cost us.
I think this has been a really enlightening, interesting conversation, Dan. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, so just a bit of big picture here, and that is when we look, I mentioned up front, we take our energy needs for granted, right? As we do our food. Right now, we are predicting that we're going to see a tremendous uptick in the demand for energy. This is caused by a couple things in Pennsylvania. Okay, this is caused by a couple things. One is we're seeing some power plants retire without replacement. In the PJM system, that's 13 states in the Northeast. PJM stands for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, but it also includes a lot of other states and portions of a lot of other states. It is the biggest regional transmission organization in America. And we're seeing this tremendous uptick in demand because we're retiring some power plants without replacement. 6.6 gigawatts, I believe. That's a lot of power. And we haven't put in adequate replacement for that. At the same time, we're seeing a tremendous uptick in the amount of energy we might use through the electrification of America, but even bigger than that is AI. So this new technology is a tremendous power user. These are going to be data centers that are going to be out the wazoo for us in this area. This culminated 2, 3 weeks ago. There was a capacity auction and 830% increase in price from the prior year. Okay, never saw a spike like this before. The CEO of First Energy said, "This is a canary in a coal mine moment," and the canary didn't make it. All right. And the CEO of PJM just came out and said, "We are expecting to see considerable uptick in prices." Okay. So we're looking at the potential, unless something changes that we don't anticipate, we're looking at the potential in the next 2, 3, 4 years of pretty big spikes in your electric bill at home. Because without that capacity, supply demand, it's going to get more painful for us to have energy on demand. Hopefully, we won't see rolling blackouts, those sorts of things. But if those things occur, that energy is made in real time. Okay, so it's not like, I call and say, "Hey, I'm going to be turning on the lights here, firing up my computer about 7 a.m. Make sure you have some power ready." It's just there. It's ready for us, whether we use it or not. It's generated in real time. It has to be there. We had a couple years ago where we had a near miss here in Pennsylvania, right on Christmas Eve, where we had some power that got knocked offline due to extreme weather. We have, of course, high energy use in the Northeast during cold snaps and so forth. We came dangerously close to having rolling blackouts. All of those things could occur. And maybe we need a good energy crisis for us all to wake up, pay a little bit of attention, but I hope not, right? So just know that as we look at energy over the next several years, it needs to come from somewhere. One of the things that is not helpful is people choosing sides, choosing energy sources and saying, "Hey, we don't want this, we don't want that." We need a lot of different forms of energy. We need choices of energy in order to keep prices lower and keep energy available to us. So I would really ask all of your listeners to look at this through the lens, an adult conversation, if you will, through the lens of we know all energy sources have potential tremendous problems. How can we mitigate those? Not solve the problem, not get rid of it, but how can we mitigate that? How can we make that better? So one other thing I would mention to your listeners, since they are all agriculturalists, is there may be an opportunity for dual use when it comes to producing energy and producing agriculture. Best of both worlds, right? I should first of all mention, since I talked earlier about pulling up parking lots and homes to try to grow corn, it is entirely feasible that we could pull solar out and make agriculture under that. If that solar is no longer useful, if it's no longer paying, or if agriculture has become a better economic option, there's no reason you can't pull those. And that soil is intact. It's been well rested. And if we do it right, we can restore that land to agriculture. At the same time, we've been looking in at the prospect of grazing sheep, grazing cattle, which is a little harder, uh, and making hay and other crops under and around that solar, so that we don't lose that entirely. We restrict it for sure, but we don't lose that entirely. We need to think and look and study and see if that's a possibility, so that we can have some of the best of both things It's not a perfect solution by any means, Ginger, but it's a way to go about doing this that we might think about for the future.
Certainly given us points to think about. I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah.
you, Dan, for being with us today, and thank you to our listeners. Don't forget to tune in next Tuesday, September 24th, as dairy educator Casey Hauer will talk with a dairy producer about their experiences with the digester.
That's a wonderful topic. Thank you.